Wen Guang. It's 9:30. Are you ready to start? Good morning. Okay, let's go. We're finally on the last day of the course. Let's just quickly review what we did yesterday. So I'm going to go back into the developer course here. If you remember, we kind of left off in the middle of it configuring our external application. But before that, we finished up basic plugin development by making our plugin crude files so we can add registers to our data table directly from a web browser. And then after that, we learned how to consume Process Maker endpoints using Process Maker's REST API. So the first thing we did was register our external application, which we're still working on. Then we learned how to create a Process Maker connector. And then we learned how to configure a service task to use a Process Maker connector in our process. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about an actual use case of a Process Maker connector after we get done with the application. So yesterday, when we started developing our external Process Maker application, we were able to create a login form. And let me go back into the local host just to show you. So here we had our login form. Let's see if I can just autofill most of these. We had our client ID, client secret, and then the username and password. And then we're sending all of this information using the post method to Process Maker, so we get an access token. And then once we have that, once we've been authenticated, we were able to get the inbox of our administrator user, since we use the admin credentials to log into our external application. So the next thing we were able to do was open a case of our process. So I'm going to go ahead and open this one. And then what we were doing on this Dynaform is first we were able to display an empty Dynaform. And then what we're doing now is we are trying to display the Dynaform content that I entered in the first task of this process. So far we've been able to fill in the fields of the text boxes and the text area. So what we're going to do now is we're going to continue retrieving previously entered values from in our drop-down and in our set of radio buttons. So to do that, we need to go back to our dynaform.php file. Here, we need to go to computer, var, then www, html, and then here's our dynaform.php file. So what we were doing is we were adding the value variable to each of these little blocks of code for our controls. So here we have the text control, and here we added the value. And I'm going to try to extend this a little bit so it doesn't look so crazy. And so we were able to do the same thing for the text area. We put the value here. So we're going to have to do something similar for the drop-down, but what we're going to do is we're going to need to get all of the predefined options, or get the value of the predefined options and then set them to selected. So let's go back into the lab and look at what we need to do to get the value of a drop-down. So it was in this one. No, not saving data. It was loading data from Process Maker. Here. So let's look at what the drop-down says. So We need to add the selected attribute in this line of code here under the for each statement. So let's go back into the dynaform.php file and look at our code for dropdowns. And then so here we have the for each function. Then let me add the selected statement right above echo. So we have selected equals value, which is exactly equal to the option variable. And then in between some brackets, we have value in between single quotation marks. And then after that, we have a question mark, then selected. Selected between quotation marks. Then a colon and empty quotation marks with a semicolon, I believe. Selected between quotation marks, colon, empty quotation marks, semicolon. Okay, that should be good. And we need to add the selected attribute down here as the last thing in this option tag here. So that's selected between quotation marks and periods. Let's see, was that a variable? Yep. Okay, so this should be enough to change or get the value I selected when I first filled out the Dynaform. So I saved that, and now I'm going to refresh my local host. And so now I get the regional selection, which is what I had initially selected when I was filling out this Dynaform. So what I'm going to do next is get the value that I selected for the radio buttons. So here we see no selection so far. And we're going to do something really similar for the radio button since it works pretty similarly. So I'm going to go back to the course and look at what we need to do. So again, here we are adding the selected attribute or selected variable, but we also need to add a checked attribute as well, which is a little bit different from the dropdown. So let's go ahead and type that code into this snippet for a radio button. So under the for each function, oh, this is the dropdown. I do not want two of those. Hopefully I didn't delete anything else. Okay, so here, after this for each, I am going to define the selected variable equal to value. Exactly equal to option. And I think I can just copy and paste this from up here to save a little bit of time. Let's see where that is. Here. And instead of selected, I'm going to write checked. So that's equal to option, value, then checked. Then I'm going to save that. And I also need to add the selected variable after the mode. So I'm going to look for the mode in my code for the case. Then after that, I'm going to add a selected. Okay, and so that should be enough to retrieve the option I entered previously for the radio button. So I'm going to refresh my local host, and now I get the retailer selected, which is what I had selected in my Dynaform. So let me open Process Maker just to compare the two, to make sure that I'm getting all of those values correctly. So I'm going to open that case in my inbox here. So for the company name, I have Process Maker. Here I have my own email address. Then the business address, which is I just put 123 Process Maker office. Then the value regional for the drop down, and retailer for the radio button. So when I look back into the local host and my external application, I see my company name, my email address, my business address, the regional geographic service area, and the retailer for the type of business. So as you can see, I'm retrieving all of my data from Process Maker. So now that we've got all of these values, you're ready to do the second to last lab in the developer course. So right now you'll be taking 15 minutes to complete this lab, loading data from Process Maker. So I'll see you at 10 o'clock. And let me know if you have any questions or problems as well. So see you at 10. Hey, are you ready to move on? Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to do is, now that we're able to send the information that I filled in the first task, what we're going to want to do is be able to make a decision based on this information, maybe enter a comment, and then submit this Dynaform to Process Maker. So if we go and look at the process map for the vendor registration process, the case is going to be routed depending on the step I take, either accepting the vendor or not. So the case is routed based on that decision. So if I don't, the case will be routed to the end event, and if I do, then the database will be updated and the vendor will be registered. So the thing we're going to have to do is add an action to our submit button that also allows us to route the case based on that decision that I'm making in the Dynaform. So the code that we're going to be using is in the last lab of this section. So all the way down here in saving data and routing cases, which is going to be the next lab that you're going to do. So what we're going to have to do is add this line of code to our dynaform.php file. And what this does is it adds an action to our Dynaform that will route the case here. So whenever someone clicks on the button, we're going to add an action, which is this action that posts data to another PHP file, which is going to be the root case.php file. So we haven't the next thing we're going to have to do is create that file as well. And that PHP file is going to execute another REST request to store the information in our Dynaform and route the case that we're working with. So let's go ahead and copy this line of code here and add it to my dynaform.php file. And where I'm going to need to add it is under the page content, start, under the Dynaform header within the form tag here. Okay, so once we get the root case PHP file up and running, this line of code should root my case. So let's take a look at the action that we've just added. So here we're calling a PHP file called root case, which takes all of the information that we're trying to retrieve from the Dynaform and send it to the process maker server. For that, we need the unique identifier of the case because we're also going to root the case, and we need to know the exact case we're trying to root. We're also going to post all of this information, as you can see here where it says method equals post. So to properly send this information, we're going to need to provide a name for each of the fields that are retrieving information from our final user. So to do this, we're going to have to do the same thing we did in the index.php file. So let's go and take a look at that file here. So here we can see that we properly named each of these fields to create a correlation between these fields and the variable that was assigned to them. So these are also the same name as the variables as well. So let's go back to the lab, and then we need to copy this code to relate each field to the case variable assigned to those fields. So here we're including a variable name in that input. So the first thing we're going to do is work with a text field because we're not retrieving any information from a title or a subtitle. So what we need to do is go back into the dynaform.php file and look for our line of code for the text. So we need to copy and paste that code after inside the input tag before the class. So here I have input name equals field. So this line of code here before the class in the input tag. So that should be okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save that for now. Then the next thing we're going to do is copy that same line of code into the text area element. So let's go ahead and do that. And that should be within the text area tag. Yeah. So here before the class. And I'll save that just in case. So we'll need to do the same for the dropdown and the radio element. So let's take a look at where the code needs to be copied. So in the dropdown within the select tag, so let's take a look. Dropdown select. Right here. So I'm going to save that, and then for the radio button. which should be here in the input tag. And that should be before the type. So let me make sure I put that in the right place. Okay. So that should be enough to send that information to Process Maker. So since we've named the dropdown and the text area elements, we can accept the vendor and add any comments. So let's go back into the local host and do that. So I'm just going to leave this as yes here, and I'll just write this vendor is accepted in the is accepted. I almost wrote in the comments at the end of that. So the other thing we're going to have to do before we can submit this form is create the rootcase.php file. So I'm going to do this first, rootcase.php. And then we're also going to need to copy and paste code from the second page of this lab into this new file. So here, this is the source code for the file. Let's see, and I'll open this. And so I'm just going to copy and paste that right here. So at the beginning of this code that we just pasted, what we're doing is we are doing a validation to make sure that we have data from our browser session. And if not, they're redirected, the user is redirected to the index page. Then here we are calling the execute REST function to execute a REST request to the Process Maker server. So this first request is going to update the values of the variables associated to the case. And this is the first request here. And if you take a look at how we retrieved the list of variables in the step before, in the dynaform.php file, we called the same service, the variable service. So here we're calling it again here. But the difference when we're calling this method is that, well, just the method is different. Here we're putting information instead of using the get method. So in short, I'm basically updating all of the values related to this case with these two lines of code when I'm executing the REST request with the variable service. So here in this second call, we're finally rooting the case by using this root case endpoint. And then once the case has been updated and routed, we'll be able to return to the list of cases to work on other cases as well. So let's go ahead and save this file and see how this is working in our process. So I'm going to go back into my external application. So I've accepted the vendor, I've added my comments. So I'm going to go ahead and submit details. And let me make sure I saved. Okay. And it looks like I might be missing something. Let me see here. And I keep on clicking out of my virtual machine. Well, I must have made a typo here somewhere, so I'm going to have you do the lab so you don't have to watch me figure out where I made a typo. And I'll see you again at 10:25. How does that sound? Okay. So I'll see you back at 10:25 and we'll go over this code again and look at the case being rooted in Process Maker. Hi, I'm just checking in. Are you ready to move on? Okay, so just to give you a brief explanation of what I needed to do, and let me go back into my virtual machine. I had to add the submit type again because for some reason it was just blank spaces when I went to look at my code. So I must have accidentally deleted that or replaced it with nothing at one point. So anyway, that's what was going on with mine. So I just made up a new case just to show you what happens when I submit the case. But before I do that, I just wanted to show you what we did in the code inspector when we were adding names to each field. So if you remember what we did just a few minutes ago, we added the name of each field in this line of code here. Name equals the variable name of the field. So when we look at our code inspector here, to make sure that we're doing everything right, we can see that we have the name equals company name, which is the same name of the variable assigned to this field. So if we go ahead, look here, we have the name of this field is equal to email, which is the name of the variable connected to the Dynaform. And we can also see that if we go into the vendor registration process and just take a look at the variables that are assigned to each of those control fields. And this is the wrong process. Let me go into the vendor registration process. And I'm going to show you that process in about an hour or two as well. So I'm going to go into my Dynaforms, review vendor details, and if we take a look at these two text box controls, we can see that I have the variable company name here and the email address web control here with the variable email as well. So as we can see in our code inspector in Firefox, that we just gave the same name of each of these text box controls, text area controls at the same name as the variable. So here we have company name and email for this email address like we just saw in our Dynaform. So now when I root the case, I'll be able to see all of this information in my as in Process Maker as well as here. So if I go to Process Maker and I go open that case again, I'll be able to see all of the details I just submitted. So here I've got Process Maker, my email address, the business address that I had submitted in the first step. I changed these a little bit, accepted yes. These are my comments. And then now at this point, we're ready to update the database and finish the process. So now basically with our external app, we learned how to create a sign-in page so we can send all of the credentials to get an access token from Process Maker. So let me just walk you through this again. So we got our client ID and client secret. Then we were able to get that access token to view our inbox, and then from our inbox we're able to open our Dynaforms. And so here we can see the Dynaform for the register vendor and database task. Okay, so that basically wraps up the external app example, but I also have another use case for you that I'm going to walk you through right now. So the next thing we are going to do with our external app is learn how to replicate the user list with our external app and learn how to edit the user information as well from our external app. So for this one, I want you to pay special attention to what I'm doing. It's going to be extremely similar to the process or to the external application that we just built, but we don't have a lab for this one. So what you're going to do is just watch what I do and then try to do the same thing after I'm finished. So right now, let's learn how to customize our external application to display the user list and modify a specific user's information. So here, we've already sent the access token to submit data, so we don't need to edit our login page again, but now we can use our external application to receive data from Process Maker and edit it. So let's go back to our HTML folder here, and we're going to create a new document called user list. Here. So what this is going to do is we're going to want to be able to display some information about every single user on our Process Maker workspace in an HTML table like the one we drew to show all of the cases in our inbox. And let me just remind you again what that looks like. So if I go back, we're going to be drawing a table just like this one, but instead of holding the case information from our inbox, we're going to be holding user information from our user list in Process Maker. So the first thing we're going to have to figure out is which REST API service we need to consume to get the user list. And we actually have already done this in the connector we built yesterday. So let's just refresh our memory. So here I'm going to go to the documentation in a new tab and then look up the REST API services again. So if you ever forget where the REST API services information is located, just go to Developer Info, then to the REST API tab. So the endpoints for getting user information is located within this administration category here. And then users we have at the top. So the first REST endpoint we see here is the one that we want, get users list. So here we can see that this service returns a list of all the users in our workspace, including users with inactive and vacation status. So down here we have our endpoint. So what we're going to want to do is just edit some code, the code that we've already used, and edit it so we're calling this REST service instead of the case inbox case, getting the inbox cases REST service. So to do that, we're going to copy the code from the list.php file here. And then we're going to paste it into the user list. So if you remember, this list.php file includes the table that we use to display the case information. So I'm actually going to make sure I copy every single line. And then I'm going to copy it into my user list.php file. So here we have an HTML table. However, it still includes the information from our process maker inbox. So we're going to want to change that so it shows the users in our process maker workspace. So the first thing we're going to do is change this variable to user list. So we know that we're trying to get the user list using that URL up here. But the next thing we're going to have to do is also change this URL as well. So if we look at our documentation, it's probably going to be almost the same here until we get to the end. So we're not going to want our cases. We're just going to want our users here. And so I'm not going to include this filter. I'm just going to add users to that after the workspace name. So here we've got users. And so let's just enable this, the var dump, to see the results we're getting from our user list variable. So I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to go back to the external application here. And then I'm going to log in again. And then let's see what the user list.php file looks like here. So I've got localhost/user_list.php. So here we have an array of all of the user information from our process maker workspace. So here in this first curly bracket and down to, let's see, there's quite a lot of information about each individual user. So here all of the information I highlighted is actually coming from the user information page in Process Maker. So if I just go back to Process Maker and just show you where we're getting this user information from, we'll be able to see that information in the array. So I'm looking at the information for my admin user since they're the first person in the user list. So we've got the first name, administrator, last name, and username are both admin, plus my email, country, United States, Florida, Miami Lakes. So let's see that information in our array. So the first thing I've got here is the user UID, which is a bunch of zeros and then 1 at the end. After that, and let me find the end of that. We have the username, which is just admin, then the first name, administrator, last name, administrator, as well as my email. the expiration date of my account, the date my account was created, the day when my account was created, which was today because I changed the email, the status of the user, which is active, of course, the country, US, state, Florida, and the city, Miami, or MMK, Miami Lakes, which is just a code. Fax number, so all of this information I'm getting from the this user information in Process Maker. So what we're going to want to do next is edit the table that was displaying the cases in our inbox to display some of this information I'm getting from the array for all of the users in my Process Maker workspace. So to do that, we're just going to edit the code in our user list file. So here we're going to change this header from inbox to user list. And then make sure this variable here is changed to user list as well in the header. I'm going to leave this first column header as number because this is just going to display the index number of each user in the table. So, and that's still pretty useful. Here, we'll change the case number to first name for the first name of the user. Then we can change this second header to last name. Here I can put the email. Then maybe I want to show the username, then the user status, and maybe the expiration date of their account. So let's try expiration date here. And then I can just delete this priority column since I don't need it anymore. And so let's make this look nice. So now all of the information in my column headers is going to look different. So if we go back and look at our user list page in the local host, and I'm going to just refresh this here, we'll get the table all the way down here, but we still don't get any information. So we have the index number, the user first name, the user last name, email, username, etc. So the next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to change the values of the variables in our table to get the right information. So let's go back into our userlist.php file and start changing that information down here. So let's look at this. This should be user list as user. And then we'll change all of these to user here. So let me just copy this. So now we have all of this reflecting the user. So then now we're going to have to change the values of the variables in here, or we'll have to change the variables actually themselves. So if the first column, we're going to want to display the user first name. So we're going to have to find out which variable stores that information in our variable dump here. So if we go all the way back up and look at the part of the array for our administrator user will be able to find that information. So if we're looking here, we have user first name equals administrator. So I know now that this is a variable I'm going to need to copy into my code to display that value in the table. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. The next thing I wanted to display was the last name. So I'm going to do that. So if I go here, I'll find that the variable that stores the last name is just user underscore last name. Here, the next thing I'm going to want to display is the email. So if I go here, look for my email, I see that the variable is called user email, like so. So here I've got the user email. Next, I want to display the username. So I'll go ahead and find the username up here, user underscore username. Like that. Next thing, status. Where is it? It should be here, active, user status. Then the user's expiration date, which is going to be up here, I think. Yes, user due date. And so the user due date stores the user account's expiration date. And we can also get rid of this priority tag here since we no longer are using that column. So we're also, I'm going to save this, my changes so far, but we're also going to have to change the code down here for the button. Or actually for how it's being routed, yeah, for the button. Okay, so here I'm going to change all of these to user. And then here I'm going to change the label of the button to update user, like that. And then here, since we're not going to route it to the Dynaform anymore, we're going to have to create another file called user to post all the information and display it. So let's just change this to user, and we'll create the user.php file in a moment. So let's go ahead and refresh the user list page to look at all of the changes that we just made. So here, go down, down, down. And so now we're displaying all of that user information correctly within this table. But we still can't update the user because we haven't updated that user.php file. So another thing I'm going to want to do is link the index to my user list file as well. So if I go here, I don't actually want to go to the well, I'll do that later. So here, the next thing we're going to have to do to be able to update the user is going to send all that information to the user.php page. So I assume we're going to need the user UID, so we're going to have to send that. So let's enable the variable dump for the users. And I'll do that up here, up variable dump user. Well, actually, it'll have to be down. So here we're getting the variable dump for our individual admin user, or just our users here. Actually, I think right. Okay, so if we want to display all the information about a certain user, we're going to have to go ahead and add a code to the user.php file. So I'm going to go ahead and create that now. And then, so let's say we wanted to update the user using a form like the one that we use in our login page, which is the index.php file. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that code into this file here. So here we have the index, which creates sort of a form that where we can edit information. So here we have our form. So let's look at this code here that we just pasted. And we're also going to want to copy code from our user list page as well. So let's just copy all of this as well here. Okay, so at the beginning of this, we're starting a new browser session with the session start function. And then if we do not have any information in the session variable, then we're going to redirect the user to the login page at index.php. So then after that, we're going to need to execute the execute REST function because we're going to need to get the details of the user that we just selected. So what we're going to have to do is change the page content here. So we can go ahead and delete all of this between the page content start and page content end, and then go ahead and copy this code in between these tags here. So now we have a form where we can display the user information and then edit the user information. So first of all, let's focus on this REST connection part. So first of all, we need to see which service we need to get information about a certain user. So what we need to do is execute a REST request to the get information user endpoint. So let's figure out what the URL of that endpoint is. So here I've got my documentation, and if we just stay in this user's wiki page, we'll also see the endpoint for the get user information REST service here. So here we have our endpoint, and so all we need here is we're looking through our users and then we're sending a specific user UID. So we're going to have to change the code in our user.php file to reflect this endpoint here. So here I've got users, but I don't need this. I did? Okay, let me see. Yeah, you're right. I think I can just delete this here. Thank you. So I'm going to need to edit this endpoint. So this is just user here. And then at the end, we're going to get the user UID in between these brackets here. Well, actually, we need to call the GET request like so. So it's going to be single quotation, period, $, GET. So we're performing a GET request to get the information about the user UID, or about the user using their UID. Okay, and so this is what our endpoint URL needs to look like now. So first we have the server URL that was entered through our login page, then API/1.0, which is in almost all of these endpoint URL addresses. Then we get the workspace name that also came from our login page, then adding the user part, and then calling the GET request to get the information with a user UID. So if we go back into our dynaform.php form, we can basically see that we do something really similar when we are calling the REST request for the Dynaform. So what we're doing here instead is we're sending the project UID to process maker to get information from that process, and then we're looking at all of the Dynaforms within that process and then getting some step, figuring out what step that Dynaform is in. So whenever we need information to put together a URL to execute a REST request, we pretty much do the same thing by performing a REST request with the variable value. So when we go, let's go back to the user.php, and we need to change the value of this variable to user. So right now we're trying to get the user information by executing a REST request. So we're going to be using this user variable to store the information about the user that we select. And this is going to be a GET request since we're trying to get information about a user and we're not sending any data, as you can see here. So the last thing I'm going to do is change this here and get it to say variable dump. Like so. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So let's see what kind of information we're going to get for a single user. And that's going to be the same information we got for the user list, and then but for an individual user. So let's go here, and we should be able to click on Update User. Let's see if I actually change that information first here. So I actually don't need this part anymore. So this actually, I forgot to change this to user ID here. So user ID equals user. This should also be user ID. Then here I don't actually need this information anymore for the class and the task. Or I do still need the class, sorry. So here, class equals button, change the label to update user. And then open. Okay, so this should be the right URL now. And let's refresh this. Here, and then now we get here in this, the information in this array is just about one single individual user, and then we're just repeating the same form that we used for the login page. So that's the next thing we're going to do. So let's go back to our user PHP file. And so here we have the form, but we don't actually want this information anymore or the same number of fields. So what we need to do first is just change the names of each of these fields. So here we have this name. So I'm going to put in the first name, then the last name, which I believe is the order that we went in for the table. I could use a different order here, but I do like to keep things the same. Email, username. Then, actually, I think this should be one word. Then this user status. And then the expiration date. So let's save this file and see the changes in our external application. So here I've got the names of the fields changed, but the next thing we're going to want to do is actually get information from Process Maker, from the user information, and then display it in this form here. So that's the next thing we're going to have to do, is be able to add a line of code to get information from Process Maker and display it, or get information from this array about the admin user and then put it into this form here. So let's go back into the user.php file and do that. So what we're going to have to do is take those variable values and insert a new value into the input type tag. So what that's going to look like is this. So after the name, I've got URL. Before the end of the tag, I'm going to just add this line for the value. Value equals quotation mark PHP echo user, and then the variable that we need to get from our array. So let me just add the brackets here. And if I look at the array, the user first name is reflected again by this user first name variable. So that's what I'm going to have to add to the code in my user.php file. User underscore first name. And then this will also need to be in between single quotations like so. And then we'll finish up by adding another question mark and then the end of that tag. So the value, we're getting the value from the array from this user first name. And we're basically also getting this information from the user PHP variable we defined up here. So I'm just going to save that and let's see that in our form. So here we're getting this, and I do need that space. Right, I forgot to close the quotation marks. Okay. So now, okay. And I'm forgetting one more thing. Value equals. And I think the closing tag, right. I accidentally used the closing tag that existed here. Okay, that should be fine now. So let's just look at that again. So here I've added this line of code, and remember that you need the quotation marks around this PHP tag here, like that, and then we need this closing tag for the input tag here. So that was what was going on. And we're basically going to be doing the same thing for each of the forms in this user information form. So let's go ahead and just copy and paste this code into each of these input type tags here, or these input tags. So this one is actually going to be user last name. And just let's make sure, because I'm paranoid. Okay, good. And then, so for this one, this is going to be the user email, like so. Then the username, which is user_username. Then the user status, which is basically just the same thing except for status after the underscore. And that should be enough to display all of the existing information about the admin user in this form here. And it looks like I need one more for the expiration date. I did not see that. Aha, here it is at the bottom. And we need that here. And so this variable should be user_do_date if I'm not mistaken. And if I am, I'll just take a look at the variable dump. So I'm going to save that and then change it. So I've got the account expiration date, but I also need to change the input type to simply text to actually display that value properly and not with like a password. Okay, great. So now we've got all of our information from Process Maker. So the last thing we're going to want to do is to be able to update this information in Process Maker. So to do that, we're going to have to change the function of this login button down here. So let's first change the label of our login button to update user. Like that. I'll save that and see that in my external app. Okay, here we've just changed that label to update user. And then the next thing we're going to have to do is change the action here in our button, login, or our update user button now. So to be able to update the user information, we're going to have to work with a different file. So we're going to first change this to form action equals update user. And that is going to be up all the way up here, form action equals update user.php. And now we're going to also create a new file called updateuser.php as well, so that button will actually do something. So what we're going to do next is we're going to continue to work with the post method, but we're going to need to properly name the information like we just did for our Dynaform fields. So remember, we put in the name value into each of the tags for our web control code. So by doing that, we're going to build a correlation between the data that our user is going to enter inside of these input elements and the variables for the information that we're going to get on the next page. So what we're going to have to do is in the input type, we're going to have to change the code to name equals the name of the variable. So here, we're going to change this to user first name, the same name as our variable. And we're going to do the same for all of the fields. So we can properly send all of that information to the next page. So here I've got the expiration date of the count, and that should be it as far as naming each of these fields. So the next thing we're going to need is the user UID as well to update this user information so we can send it to Process Maker. So we're going to have, so as part of the URL that we're going to open, we're going to have to send the user ID in that URL. So if we go up here back into our action, we're going to have to add a few other parameters to the URL here. So I'm adding the question mark, user ID equals, and then a PHP tag, plus we're using the get method here. And then here we're going to add the user ID variable that we created earlier. And then we'll close this tag with a question mark and those brackets there. So now the next thing we're going to do is create the update user PHP file. So we're going to go back into the HTML folder and create that new file here. And I actually wanted to change that name. So this is going to be called the update user.php. And so I'm going to do that here. So the next thing we're going to do is just add a little bit of code to check the information that we are getting from the previous page. So I'm going to go ahead, add my PHP tag here, then add a variable dump to be able to see the value of the post variable that will post the information, and then close that PHP tag as well as save it. So let's go ahead and update our page in the external application here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. So then I click on Update User, and here I'm getting the information that I'm about to post to Process Maker. So now when I change the information, we know that the information I changed is getting posted to Process Maker because it's being stored within that post variable that we just added to our variable dump. And then here, as you can see, we're also getting the user ID in the URL as well. So the next thing we're going to do is copy some code from our root case PHP file and paste it into our update user.php file, because we're basically doing something similar as when we rooted the case. So I'm going to go ahead and close that first. And then I'm going to go here and then copy and paste some of this code. So I'm going to copy this from session start to the variable dump, or actually to here. So here I've got my session start function plus the first REST call to execute our REST request. So here, and then I'm going to replace the variable dump here. Okay, so now I have some of the code I need for the update user file. So in this code, what we're doing is we're going to be starting a new browser session just to get information from the browser session, from which we need to get the workspace name and the access token that we're going to use. So we basically have done this in almost every single page we've created in our external application so far. And then down here, we're also including the execute REST function to call our REST service. So the next thing we're going to have to do is to find out what kind of requests we need to make to update a user's details. So all of that information can be found in our wiki like usual. So let's see if it's on this page. So here we have the REST endpoint for update user information here in our table of contents. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So here it's telling us this REST service updates user information. And then here we've got the structure of our endpoint here. So after the workspace, we need to enter the user and the user UID. So I'm going to go ahead and edit the structure of our endpoint in this file here. So after workspace, that's going to be user, and then we'll leave that get like so, but we're going to use the user ID instead of the case, like we were doing with the root case function. And we actually don't need this here anymore. So that is what the structure of our URL is going to look like to execute our REST request to ProcessMaker. So now we need to send all of the information in the form, and we know we need a post request to do that. So we're going to be sending all of the data we saw in the variable dump before of the user information form as part of our REST request. So the next thing we're going to do is redirect our user to the user list after they've posted that information to ProcessMaker. So let's go back to the root case PHP file and then copy this code. Copy the code here, just the last line of code, and then paste it into our update user.php file near the end, like this. And so we're not going to want to go back to the list, we want to go back to our user list, like that. So this line of code should be enough to get the user list from ProcessMaker so we can edit any individual user. So notice we basically did the same thing yesterday. So we retrieve a retrieved a list of cases, displayed the case information in a table and a form, and then sent the changed information to ProcessMaker. So basically there's a lot of customizations we can do with the code that we use to build our external application for opening cases from ProcessMaker, as well as the code we're using here to update user information. So let's go back, save this, and then go back into our external application and then change some information. So I'm going to go back here. Then I'm going to maybe update. I'm going to go back to the user list and update a different user. So I'm going to update Joshua Austin. So update user. So here I have Joshua Austin's information, and I'll just change his email address to joshua.austin@example.com. So I'm going to go ahead and update that user in ProcessMaker. So here in our user information table, we can also see the information I just changed about Joshua Austin, and which it was just the email here, and we should see the same thing in ProcessMaker. So I'm going to go ahead. Well, I guess I need to log in again. And then I'm going to look at wherever Joshua Austin is here. Here. Look at his summary. And then here we can see the email I just changed about Joshua reflected in ProcessMaker. So basically what I want you to do is I want you to do the exact same thing I did, but on your own. So let me just go through all of the information that we just changed. So to hopefully help you a little bit. So what we needed to do was, first of all, we created this folder or this file called userlist_php, and we copied the information from our list.php from the table to create another table, including all of the information from our user list in ProcessMaker. So once we had our user list, we wanted to be able to update the information or view the information from about an individual user in a form. So the next thing we did was we created this file called user.php, and we copied the code from the index.php file here, and then and I'm going to change this to userlist.php quickly. So here we copied the code from our index, and this is the form you remember that we used to log into our external app, and we copied that into user.php so we could recreate that same form to view user information and enter it in ProcessMaker or submit it to ProcessMaker. So in order to submit it to ProcessMaker, we needed to change the action of this form here to go to the update user.php file so we could post that information to ProcessMaker using this execute REST function here. So here we're taking the information from about our user from the previous page and then posting it to ProcessMaker here. And then at the very end, we redirected that user to this user list _list PHP file. So in summary, what you need to do is you need to create these, I think it's 4 files. Let's count. So first we did user list, then user, then update user. So that's 3 files. Okay, so you need to recreate these 3 files in order to update user information in ProcessMaker. And then what you're going to want to do is the final result is just in your, let's go all the way back, localhost, submit this information. What you want to be able to do is log in, then view the list of users, like so, and then you're going to want to be able to update one of these users using a form like this one, and then post that information to Process Maker. So what I want you to do now is I want you to do everything I just done on your own. So if you need me to show you any of the files, any of the code that I use, just ask me. I'll be here watching for your comments. Is there any more questions before you get started on replicating this user list in your external app? Yeah, okay, let's go back to that page. User PHP, and you wanted the form action. This is the code. Would you like me to, I'll copy and paste that for you. Is that what you wanted to see? Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste that just in case. And I'm going to give you the next 20 minutes. So I'll be here, and I'll be helping you in the case. Let's see. Oh, I did not copy that. Oh, right, because I'm in the virtual machine. Okay, so I'm going to just type that for you when you get to that point. But okay, so I'll see you at 11:50. Feel free to ask me any questions, and I'm going to send you this line of code here through the chat. Hi, Wen Guang. Are you ready to continue? Okay, great. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to use a Process Maker connector within a Process Maker process. So I'm going to just go ahead and close a bunch of this stuff. I don't need this right now. So what I did while you are out was download some DocuSign connectors to my workspace. And let me refresh this. My session must have timed out. So what I did was I downloaded a few DocuSign connectors to use in that process. I accidentally went to earlier. So I've downloaded 3. I've got the create templates from template ID, get template recipients, and get templates. So when you, as I showed you before, when you download a connector from the connector library, you don't only download and have this connector here in this connector library, but you also create a new configuration or authentication protocol configuration here. So another one that was added for the DocuSign connectors was this authentication right here, but as you'll see, I'm going to continue using no authentication, which was also added using my DocuSign connectors as well. And then we also download a new category. So here I have the DocuSign category, and here you can see I have the name, the product name, the version, everything already written by Process Maker, because Process Maker was the one who made these plugins. So I've got my new DocuSign authentication configuration, category, and connectors. So before I use those connectors in Process Maker, I need to go ahead and configure everything in DocuSign so I actually have documents that I can retrieve from DocuSign. And I'm using DocuSign as an example because it's one of the most requested plugins that we have, and it's more popular. So first of all, let me look for the DocuSign sandbox, which will allow me to create templates and experiment with what DocuSign can do. So I'm just going to Google search DocuSign sandbox here. And I'm going to go here to this address, DocuSign, developers.docusign.com. And the one thing I want to point out is that if you want to experiment with the DocuSign in the future, there's 2 different types of account. You have like the developer's account that we're about to sign into now, and you have a regular signer account, which won't let you create documents, and it won't let you create templates. You'll just be able to sign documents using that type of account. So if you do end up experimenting with the DocuSign and the connectors, just make sure that you search for DocuSign Sandbox and you go to the developer side of DocuSign. So I'm going to log in now with my DocuSign account. I'm going to hit go to Sandbox to log in. And I'm going to log in with my credentials. And let me close my Chrome window because I think that's what's making my internet slow. Okay, so here I've got my DocuSign account. And then when you're using these DocuSign connectors, the first thing you're going to want to do is take a look at your user ID. So here, if you click on your profile picture up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll be able to see a few of your account details like the name, your profile picture, and your email address, as well as your user ID here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this into a new file just to keep track of that. So here, I'll just name this DocuSign.text. Like so. So here I've got my user ID, and I'll just write that here. And what you need to do is you need to enter your user ID into the DocuSign endpoint so it knows so Process Maker and the connector you're using know exactly which DocuSign account you're getting your templates from. So I'm going to go back into DocuSign, and the other thing you need to use the DocuSign connectors is the integration key. So if I go and click on my Go to Admin button there by hovering over the menu from my profile picture, I'll be able to see the administration interface. And if I scroll down the page and look at my the menu on the left side, I see this category called integrations. And here I can choose my APIs and keys. So here I can see a list of my integrator keys. And the thing is, and the other reason why you need to use a sandbox account for DocuSign is because you're going to need these integrator keys here, and with a normal signer account, it won't let you generate these integrator keys. So what I'm going to do now is also copy and paste this first integrator key into my DocuSign text file. Let's see, okay. So that won't let me redo. Just making sure I didn't delete anything. So now I have my integrator key here. And I'll just label that so I remember what that's for. And then I can close that. So the other information you can see here is your API username, API password, and the API account ID, but we actually don't need any of this information to use Process Maker connectors. We just need one of the integrator keys down here. So the user ID and the integrator key are enough for me to start configuring my Process Maker connectors to work with DocuSign. And before I configure my Process Maker connectors, I want to actually take a look at the templates I have available with my DocuSign account. So I'm going to go back and look for my templates. I'll go back to DocuSign to see that menu. So here I'm going to go to my templates. And so inside each of the templates that I see listed here, we're going to include all of the documents that need to be signed, as well as the people or the signers that need to sign the documents inside of my templates. So here I've already got an onboarding template, an expense travel report template, another expense report template, and all of these others here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the expense report template here. And I'm going to, well, I don't want to use that right now. I wanted to edit it. So I'm going to go back and edit this template just to see what is inside this expense report template. So here we can see the title of the template put here, and we would be able to enter a description of this template if we so choose. And then down here, we're able to add documents to the envelope. And the envelope is sort of the packet of documents that you can send to your signers. So just a quick overview of what DocuSign does is it allows people to sign documents digitally. So, and you'll be seeing how to do that when we go through a case of the process that I'm about to show you. But the first thing you need to do if you want to be able to retrieve templates in Process Maker and send those templates in an envelope to the signers, you need to already have a DocuSign account, you need to have those integrator keys and your user ID, and you need to configure the documents in your template to send in the envelope. So here I've already got my expense report in the PDF form, and then this is just what this looks like as a PDF file in the case we wanted to print it out for whatever reason. We could also upload additional documents to our envelope as well, and this allows us to upload physical documents, and then we could add digital signature fields to those documents with Dynaform as well. And I'll show you in a bit how to add signature fields and other input fields onto these documents as well. So then finally here we can add recipients to our envelope. So here we choose the role of the signers. So basically what these roles are for is that you can configure different fields for each type or each requester role to fill out. So let's say the requester only needed to sign the form and enter the date, as well as they need to add the item information that they're purchasing. Whereas the signer, maybe the supervisor, all he needs to do is look at the information the requester filled in and then sign the expense report. So basically you can configure different fields to fill out for each different role you assign here in this recipients section. So here you can also choose the actions that they need to complete as well. So here we've just got it for needs to sign. And that's pretty much it. You can add more recipients, as much recipients as you want. You can set a signing order. So first it would send it to the requester and then it would send it to the supervisor. In this case, we'll just send this document to both of these signers at once. And so that's basically all you need to do to configure your DocuSign template. So the next thing we can do is add fields to the expense report for the signers to fill out. So like you saw before, we have this expense report PDF file, but what we're doing here is we're adding these as fields from this menu on the left side here, and then dragging and dropping them onto this expense report document here. So let's say I wanted to, well, first I can drag this full name element down here, so it's not in purpose anymore. We could also maybe add, let's see what other fields we can add in here. Maybe we wanted to add a note. We could do that here. So basically, it kind of resembles the Dynaform designer in a way, because you can just drag and drop these input fields onto your document, and then when this document is sent to the requester and the supervisor, they'll be filling out these forms. So as you can see here in this drop-down box, we also can select between the type of signer. So this is the form that the requester is going to fill out. So you can see he's going to fill out everything in yellow. But if we're the supervisor, then we're just filling out all of this stuff in blue, which is only the date signed. And then when we add additional fields for the supervisor to fill out, like for example, an initial, those fields are going to be added in blue to this form, like you see here. So now I've got my template configured so that the signers can input some information into this form. So I'm ready to save it and close this form editor. And then that just takes me back to the list of templates. So now, the next thing we need to do now that we have our templates in DocuSign is configure the connectors in our process to work with these templates and retrieve them in our process. So for now, to do that, I'm going to go ahead. I think I can close that. Hopefully I don't need that later. And so first of all, I just want to show you the process that I designed that's going to be integrating those connectors into my process. You don't have this on your own workspace, so here I'm just kind of showing you. But here we have a very simple 4-task process. So in this first process, when I start a case, I'm going to see a Dynaform, and that Dynaform is going to be, well, let's see, let's look at my steps. So this one is going to be the sign request Dynaform, and I'm going to just look at the Dynaform template that I have here. So when I start a case, I'm going to see this Dynaform, the sign request Dynaform. And from this first dropdown, what is going to happen is that I'm going to execute a connector using a function in a trigger to autofill this template dropdown with the list of templates from my DocuSign account. And then here I can add the subject of the email as well as the message I want to include the email that I'm going to send to the signers. So if I look at my template dropdown, we're going to see that this is connected to the template variable, and the template variable is actually going to get its value, or this template variable is going to store this template that I choose in this dropdown. And then if I look at this data variable here, this template dropdown is going to fill in this dropdown with the names of my templates from my DocuSign account. And so if I preview this, I'm not going to see any templates yet because I haven't executed the trigger to fill in this template. But basically, this is what the Dynaform is going to look like to this end user. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And like I mentioned to you before, we actually have a trigger called get templates that is going to go off before the Dynaform to fill in that template dropdown. So if I go ahead and look at my trigger here, I can see that I am using this execute REST connector function with the parameter get templates, which, if you recall, is the name of the connector that I downloaded. And it's going to store the values I get from the get templates trigger in this PHP variable message array. So then in this second line, this message array process maker variable is going to store the exact same information in the message array variable. And I actually don't need this line of code, but this, like I think I told you in the architect course, is that to be able to see the values of the variables in our debugger, we actually do need to redefine them as process maker variables. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm defining the PHP variable as a process maker variable as well, so I'll be able to see it in the debugger when I look at my case, or when I open a case. So then what this does is it takes the name of the templates that I have in my account and stores them in this template variable. Or basically, actually, it just takes all of the information from my templates in my DocuSign account and stores it in that variable here. Then here we are defining the template dropdown function. So for each template we get from message array, we are going to just take the template ID and the template name. So that's my trigger. So that is how the first task is being is configured. So before I start a new case, I just want to show you how the connector is configured. So I'm just going to open this in a new tab so I don't have to keep on going back and forth. And I'm going to look at my connectors. So here is the get templates connector that I'm using in that trigger with the what is that? The execute ret? No. Well, it's with that function that I showed you earlier, the get connector. I'm forgetting the name of that function, but this is the connector that we use as a parameter in the function that I'm talking about in that trigger. So this get templates, what it does, as we can see from this description, is it retrieves all the templates defined in my DocuSign account. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on edit. So here I've got the name, the description, the creation date, the category. That was all defined for me. Here we're using the get method because we're trying to get information about the templates from my DocuSign account. And so to be able to get the Dynaforms, or sorry, the templates from my DocuSign account, I'm going to have to include my user ID in this URL here. So if we go back and look at my DocuSign text file like this, we can see that my user ID is 3430907, and the same thing has already been entered into this URL here. And then so we're going to my account, and then we're getting the templates from my account. And then here for the authentication configuration, I'm just using no authentication because what I'm doing down here is I'm using this header to authenticate myself into DocuSign. So if I check out edit here and extend this window, I'm able to see the username, which was is my username for DocuSign, my DocuSign password, and the integrator key that I had saved before in my DocuSign text file. And so that's the information we need to put in the header in order to be able to use this connector. So I'm just going to close that. We do not need any query parameters, and we do not need to just define the JSON body for this particular connector, and the author will just remain process maker here. And that's the complete configuration of my Get Templates connector. So I'm just going to go ahead and test it just to show you the response that I'm going to get, which is here. So you can see from my response code that the connector was executed successfully, and here we get all of the information about the templates from my account. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this, close that, save it. And that is the other thing I want to show you is if we go into category and we look at the DocuSign category, we'll see that the DocuSign category also has its own authentication configuration as well. So what you're going to want to do is make sure that it's changed to no authentication so that it's going to work properly, because the category of the category of the connector and the configuration authentication of the individual connectors all need to be the same. So just to reiterate, the authentication configuration of the category and the authentication of the individual connectors in that category have to have the same authentication configuration. Otherwise, you're going to have problems in your process. So now if I go to the home page and I start a case of my process, the DocuSign demo, I should see those DocuSign templates show up. So here I have the list of all of the templates from my DocuSign account. And so if we look here, and there's one last thing I actually did forget to show you. So if I look at the connector properties, or of the properties of this, no, actually I didn't forget to show you something because it was in the trigger. I got confused with the service task. But if we do look at the trigger here, or that's the Dynaform. So let me actually go to the trigger here. So we have steps, then the Dynaform, then our get templates trigger. We have that message array variable, and that stores all the information that we're getting back from this execute REST connector function being called for get templates. So here, if we go back to this, our message array variable, it basically stores that entire response object that we got when we tested the connector before. So we have the message array, and then we also defined another variable called template dropdown, which just stores the ID and the names of our templates here. So here we've got this array. So we've got the template ID as well as the template name, and only the template name is showing up in our dropdown here. Okay, so that's how the first task in our process is configured. And if we go back to the designer, we're actually going, in the next task, this is a service task. So this is the second way you can call connectors in your process. So you can do it with that function in the case you don't need any query path parameters or to define a JSON body. And so here, if I look at the properties, so just to remind you, you need to set the task type to service task in order to be able to use a connector within your process. So then here, I'm going to go down to properties. And if you right click on your service task, go to properties like I just did, you'll be able to configure your connector here. So in this service task, I'm using this get template recipients connector like here. Here we have it, the description retrieves all the templates defined in the account, but actually this one retrieves the recipients of the template from your DocuSign account. So again, here we have the URL where I put my user ID. And then here we're using a variable called template ID. So if you remember from our trigger, we actually also defined template ID as well. And we're using it here in the URL to get the signers from out the template we chose in the Dynaform here. So we're choosing a Dynaform. Now we get a template ID. If I send this task, it will send the template ID of the expense report, and then we use it as a path parameter in this URL here to get the signers from that particular template that I just chose. So again, we have the authentication configuration here, which again is no authentication because what we're doing is we're using this header here to authenticate. So if I click on edit here, it's all of that all of my account information, my email, username, my password, and the integrator key that I got before. For this one, we don't need any query parameters, but here, as you can see, we've defined our path parameters. So we're getting our template ID from the value of the template variable here. So here we don't have a JSON body type that we need to define. And then here in this ID response configuration, we can define the variable that stores the returned value from our connector. So then we can't test this yet since we don't have a template ID for the path parameter. It's just going to give us an error. So I'm going to just go ahead and close this configuration. Well, actually, before I close the configuration, I do want to point out that basically that same configuration is also from our connector here. So that was the get template recipients connector. And if I edit it, it's basically the same interface. So if you need maybe a more general configuration for your connector here, then you would put that in your PM connectors. But if for some reason you needed to change the configuration for an individual process, you can also do that from within the service task as well. But here we basically just have the exact same configuration we just saw in my service task properties. And just to show you, if you go to download, and if we choose the DocuSign category, we'll be able to see all of the connectors that I downloaded for this particular process. So I'm just going to close that window. And so basically all I needed to do for this service task here was just configure the connector and the properties, and that's enough for me to be able to route the case from the selected template task and get it to the service task. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now with the case I've already started. So here, oh sorry, this is the wrong window. I'm going to switch that. So here I'm going to choose the template expense report, and I'm going to go ahead and send this Dynaform. So it's going to give me a debugger breakpoint. And then now it's telling me the next task is the get signer service task. It also tells me the following case is a service task. I'm going to go ahead and click on continue here. And then here I can look at my debugger to see which variable values were changed. So here, that's the message array variable from the first trigger that went off. And if we go down, I think the name of that variable was get recipients or something like that. Yeah, response get recipients. So here we can see that our connector, our REST request was successful because we get the response code 200. And let me just look at it here. So the response code's 200, which is great. So here we get the recipient IDs. We get the role name, which is what we're going to pull up in the next Dynaform. And I'll explain that to you in a second. And we also get the supervised role in a second as well. So we're going to take these two values that I just pointed out, the supervisor and the role, or sorry, the requester, and we'll use those role names to populate a drop-down in the next Dynaform we're going to see. So before I go ahead and route this case to the third task, I just want to show you how the third task is set up. So I'm going to go back to my process, and here I have the assigned signers task, which in this case is a user task. So, and the user task just indicates the fact that a process maker user is going to be completing the task within process maker. Just a reminder of what this particular task type means. So if I go down into the into the steps, I'll see that I have the assigned signers Dynaform assigned to this task, as well as the get roles trigger that will go off before the Dynaform. So if I just go ahead and edit this Dynaform, so what I'm going to see here is a grid. And this grid is going to populate the name of the process maker user here, which is going to be come from the grid signers variable. And then this DocuSign roles grid is going to come from this role drop-down variable that I'm going to define using the trigger that is set to go off before this Dynaform. So if I take a look at the preview, we're going to see that we have a list of users here that we can choose from. And then since the trigger hasn't gone off yet to get the roles from DocuSign in this preview, we won't be able to see the roles in this dropdown yet, but we will see them when we root the case shortly. So the other thing I want to show you is this get roles trigger here. So I've got edit, and so here we're getting the recipients from this get response get recipients variable, which is the value that we got from the get recipient template recipients connector. So here it's just getting the signers from this variable, and then it's going to put those values into this role dropdown variable here that we're going, and then that will allow us to choose from the roles in the dropdown in that Dynaform. So I'm just going to hit save there. And I think that's all we really need to know about the configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and route the case to the third task to see that Dynaform in action. So here I've got the task in the assigned signers task, and then so here I can choose a recipient. I'm going to list it, keep it as administrator just because I have the administrator account set up with my own email address, so I can get those the envelope that's going to be sent to me through this process. So here I'm going to just leave it on requester, but if you remember from the template I showed you in DocuSign, we had these two roles. We had the requester and the supervisor. And so this is coming directly from DocuSign using the get recipients from template connector. So I'm just going to choose requester, and then I'm going to hit send. And so what's going on here is that we're getting another trigger that's going off after this, after the Dynaform called build signers. So if we go ahead and we go back to this task and look at the steps, we can see the code for the build signers trigger that's assigned to go off after the Dynaform. And if we hit edit, we can just see that we're getting the role name from the roles dropdown. Then we got the name from the grid signers dropdown and the email from the user that we select in the dropdown. And it's just going to send it to the connector that we use in the next one. So I'm just going to go ahead and exit out of that. And so here in this service task, we're going to use another connector. So you see we've got this task configured as a service task like so. And then we can go into the properties to look at the connector that's configured for this service task. So this one is going to be create envelope from template ID. So what this does is it looks at the template ID we've chosen and then sends the envelope that was configured for that template ID. So if you remember, we had, when we were looking at how to edit templates in DocuSign, we had an envelope that was comprised of all of the documents in our envelope template. So here we're also using the post method because we're sending information to DocuSign in order to send those envelopes to our recipient. So here we've got the URL for this endpoint. Here I've got my user ID as well. I'm using no authentication for the authentication configuration. Here we've got two headers. One we're setting the content type, which is going to be the JSON body. And then here I've got my authentication configuration in the header for DocuSign using my DocuSign credentials as well as the integrator key. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So the next thing I want to look at is the body I have here. So here I've just defined the body. I'm getting the template, the message, the subject, the role name, and the email, and I'm just sending some of that information to DocuSign. And then the response object, I'm just storing in a variable called object variable, since we don't really need that response object from the service task, since this is the last task in my process. And I can't save this yet because it depends on a few variables, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. So lastly, what I'm going to do is route this whole case to the last task, and then it will be sent to my email, and I'll be able to open that. I'll be able to open that template from my email and edit it in DocuSign. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my case. I'm going to continue it here to the send envelope service task. Continue. Continue. And I actually wanted to look at the debugger for that, but I think that's a little bit too late. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to check my email to see that sent to me. So here I've got an email from my DocuSign account, which is actually my manager's DocuSign account. And so if I open this email, I'll be able to review and sign the document by clicking on this yellow button up here. So it tells me Giovanni Lopez sent me a document to review and sign. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this button. And then load that envelope in DocuSign. So here, let's just say I agree. It's asking me to please sign the document. I'm going to continue. Here I can initial it if I need to, and here it allows me to add some initials. So my initials are actually SB. My name is not actually the administrator. So here I'll adopt an initial. And so here my initials are added. We have my name, my department I can fill out. My department would be training. Manager is Giovanni. And then I can sign here, and it just adds my signature like that. And ironically, that actually is a little bit what my handwriting looks like. But anyway, it just has those default handwriting types. But anyway, and then once you're done, you can finish the document. And there's another thing you can do also is that, let's say I don't want to sign up. And what DocuSign also does is when all of the recipients finish signing, you receive an email with a link to the document. So I don't actually think I have that. Oh, yep, okay, it is set up for me. So it's saying your document has been completed. So that's kind of handy in the case you have some documents that need to be signed by other people. You can have them integrated into your process, so you can just automatically send those documents to be signed at certain points in your process. So another example you can use it for is an employee onboarding process, and you could put an employee contract and get it signed through DocuSign as well. Well, this one was a purchase order process that needed a signature as well. Probably other kinds of like vendor registration would also be a good one in that case. So there's a bunch of applications you can use with the DocuSign connectors and Process Maker. We also offer Adobe Sign connectors out as well that basically do the exact same thing as the DocuSign connectors. So if you also already have an Adobe Sign account, you can use those connectors to do the same things as well. So I think that wraps up my explanation of using DocuSign connectors in your process maker processes. I think right now I'm going to have us take a break before we continue on to the next part of the process. So after this, what we're going to do is go into the lab, and looks like I closed that tab. That's the documentation. If you haven't been able to tell, my brain is fried today. I've been clicking on all of the wrong things. So here I'm going to go to the developer course. So what we're going to do after we come back from the break is we're going to look at how we can back up and restore Process Maker workspaces. So we're going to work on this advanced administration of a Process Maker server when we come back from the break. So let's take about 15 or 20 minutes. So I'll see you again at 1:15. So see you at 1:15. Hi, Wen Guang. Are you ready to come back from break? Okay, cool. So the last thing we're going to do is go over this section, Advanced Administration of a Process Maker Server. Since I don't anticipate this taking up an hour and 15 minutes, I will probably have time to show you how the new Web Entry 2.0 and multiple file versioning. So we'll see how much time we have for that after you finish this lab. About how to schedule cron jobs. I don't think, yeah, this one's very short, so that won't take you any time at all, I don't think. So to be able to work and back up workspaces, we're going to have to work with our terminal in our Linux environment, and then we'll be using functions offered by our Process Maker script to create workspace data as well as restore them. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my Linux terminal here. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is make myself the super user. So the command for that is just sudo su, and then I'll enter the password. Okay, so now that I'm the super user, I'm going to go ahead and go to my Process Maker installation folder. And if you remember from yesterday, you need to be within your Process Maker installation folder to call the Process Maker script. So our Process Maker installation folder is located at opt/processmaker. I think my virtual machine might have frozen. Okay, there we go. So we're there, and now we're going to open it. And if you can, as you can see here, we have the Gulliver framework and all of that, as well as our process maker script here. So let's go ahead and call this script so we can refresh our memory of what functions are offered here. So I'm just calling the process maker script, and it's thinking. So here I have all of these functions, and yesterday we used the database upgrade function to upgrade our database and include that data table that we created using our CRUD files. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these functions down here to back up our workspace and restore our workspace. So the upgrade procedure is going to do the same thing the database upgrade function did yesterday. It just takes the database structure in Process Maker and makes sure it's properly configured. So it basically does that with the workspace backup as well. We're also going to be working with different files to make sure our translations are updated and that all of the plugins are properly installed. So for example, let's create a new backup of our workspace. So right now, as we all know, we're working with our workspace, our workflow workspace. So we're going to create a backup for our complete workflow environment. So to do this, we need our process maker script and this workspace backup function here. And then the parameters of this function are the workspace name and the file path of the backup created. So I'm going to go ahead. First, I need to call the process maker script. So I'm going to enter that in my terminal. Then we need the name of the function, which is just workspace backup. And then we need our parameters. So first it's the name of the workspace, which is just workflow, and then the name of the file path where we're going to be creating this new workspace backup. So that one, I'm going to save this in the home directory. And then from there in the process maker folder, and then we're going to create a new tar file containing the backup of our workspace called onlinetraining.tar. So, and this also needs to be enclosed in quotation marks. So what we're doing here is we are basically saving our complete workspace data in this file, the onlinetraining.tar file. So as part of the backup, we're going to have the process maker version. So we need to make sure that we always restore backups that correspond to the same process maker version that we used for this procedure. And also pay attention to which system environment you're using, because there are certain restrictions when you restore a backup from a Windows environment to a Linux environment, for example. So just to reiterate that, be really careful about the version of Process Maker you're making the backup with, as well as the environment you're making the backup on. Because if those two factors change, very likely you won't be able to restore some or all of the workspace, or you might have some issues. Either way, just make sure you pay attention that the version number remains the same and the environment is as well as the same. And if not, maybe at least you'll know where the problems might come from. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this function. So here it's backing up the database, saving the database WF workflow, and it's still going ahead. So we just need to wait for up to finish. It's copying the database to the backup, copying the files in our workflow workspace to backup. Okay, so now we've finally got this. So here it's giving me the process maker version, which is helpful information, our system, which is Ubuntu. We have the PHP version as well, and all of the plugins that we have included in our workspace, including the one I made for this training session. So then we get the workspace name and the version of MySQL that we're using as well. So that's really helpful information that to have when we choose to restore a workspace using this particular backup. So whenever you try to restore a backup file, all you need to do is just enter a similar line like I just used, which is this one, into the command terminal. So first the process maker script, as we see here, then the name of the restore function, or the name of the backup function here, and the workspace, as well as the file name. And then basically, yeah, restoring a backup is just going to be workspace restore. And I actually need to use the arrow keys to go back. So the next function we're going to use to restore the backup would be workspace restore. So let's see if we can go ahead and find that. So from the list of functions available in our process maker script, we had the workspace backup that we just used to back up our workspace, and we also have the workspace restore, which we can use to restore a workspace. So when we have two options when we're restoring a backup file. So the first thing we can do is create a new workspace based on this backup file, or override an existing workspace. So for example, if we wanted to restore our workflow workspace and we wanted to overwrite the existing workspace with the same name, we would have to include the -0 or -O option after the name of the function. So here I would just add -O to overwrite the existing workspace. And then I would overwrite it using the backup, from this file here. But in the case we don't, and this deleted that quotation mark. So in the case I don't want to override and I want to create a new workspace using this backup file as a template, I can just go ahead and remove this -O up here, like so. Include the name of first we can also delete the name of the workspace as well. Delete that extra space. So here we've got the process maker script, the name of the function we're using to restore the workspace, and then the file path of the file that we're using to, or the file path of the backup that we're using to restore the workspace, and then the name of the workflow, or the name of the restored workspace in the case we create a new workspace instead of overwriting the existing one. So, and in this case, we would have to also provide a new name for the new workspace as well. So we only have one, we can only have one workspace with the same name. So that's all you really need to do to restore a workspace. And that should hopefully be pretty simple. So the next thing I'm going to do is just clear this terminal here. So the other thing we can do is we can schedule these kinds of actions using the cron tab in Linux, or schedule tasks in Windows, just like we configured, we need to configure a cron job for Process Maker. So what we just did was an example of how to quickly create and restore a backup file, but whenever you need to do that for a production server, there are other things that we need to take into account. So we can find some more information about backing up and restoring workspaces in our wiki. Let me close this. Let me close this again. And let's go to our documentation. And if we go to system administration here, we can find a bunch of information about how to back up and restore workspaces. So here we can look up backing up and restoring workspaces. And then if we look up here, let's look at backing up workspaces. We can basically see the same line of code we just used in our Ubuntu environment to back up our workspace. So what we had here was the process maker script, the name of the workspace backup function, the name of the workspace, and then the file path of the backup file that we use to restore the workspace. And then here's the same for Windows as well if you use Windows. Here they give you a few examples. And then down here they also give you some more information about backing up large workspaces. So here we have this new section called backing up large workspaces, and then how to do it in Linux and Windows here. So if you ever need any more information about backing up and restoring workspaces, you can also do that here. So let's go back into our terminal. And another function that is available with our process maker script is the workspace upgrade function. And okay, so that's the very last function we see here in our list of functions for process maker. So we can use this option to upgrade one of our workspaces, or the upgrade function to upgrade all of our workspaces. We also have a third database upgrade function to just upgrade the database as well, instead of the whole workspace. So yeah, here is the upgrade function for all workspaces, and then workspace upgrade for a single workspace. So let's see what happens when we execute a complete upgrade. So let's go ahead and call the process maker script here, and then this simple upgrade function after. So we have upgrade like so. So it's going to give us a bunch of these validations, and I'm just going to hit yes. Then it's going to clear the cache. It's updating our translations. And it also, if you look up here, it's also taking a look at our database structure to check if there's anything we need to change. But here it says it finds nothing. Verifying role permissions in our role-based, what does that stand for? Access control, something like that. So all roles and permissions are already created. Let's see if this is done here. Okay, so looks like it finished. Or possibly not, no. So we need to wait a little bit. So basically what we're doing here with this upgrade function is just making sure that the new version of Process Maker will work properly on this environment. And this is taking a really long time for some reason. Okay, finally, it's telling me the upgrade was successful, and then finally it's giving me all of those enters I had put in earlier. So here it's updating the backup log files, updating triggers, updating the database translations. So it's doing all of this stuff with just that upgrade function. So as the last thing I'm going to show you as part of this course is I'm going to show you how to schedule a cron job. So let's go back to the wiki and look for our pages on scheduling crons. So if we go here, we're going to go to this executing cron scripts page from the sys administration category. So here I've got all the information about executing cron scripts in Process Maker. So what the cron file does is it just checks that all the messages in Process Maker are going to be sent automatically, checks for cases that are started with a timer event. And for example, if we have an intermediate timer event, this cron script is going to make sure that the timeout works properly in the process. So what we can do is execute this command line manually right now. And then in a few minutes, I'll show you how to schedule that command line automatically. So what we're going to do is we're going to be executing a PHP file located in our Process Maker installation folder. So let's just navigate there in our command terminal. So I'm going to enter php/opt/workflow/engine/bin/cron.php. And that's the location of our cron file. And so here we just ran the cron file, and it's going to give you a short summary, or actually a long summary of, no, a short summary I got. It's actually just down here. Okay, so what it does is it resends emails, unpauses cases, and just remember sometimes cases are referred to as applications. So just keep that in mind when you're reading documentation or you're looking at all of this code in the background. So if you remember, we also had variables like app number, which was the case number, app status, which was the status of the case. So just keep that in mind. So it's calculating the duration of each task, it's calculating the duration of each course, executing events that need to be executed in our processes. So let's say that one process was left off at an intermediate timer event. It executes those events in this file. Then it will update the case labels and then check for unassigned cases. And then it executes this file as well to generate information for your SLA report in Process Maker. So that's everything that the cron does. So if we go back into the wiki page, we actually also have different cron files as well. So we have a timer event cron script that will print out which timer events were executed in our workspace. So here it gives you an example of what happens when you execute that cron and you do have a timer event pending in your case, or a timer event going off in your case, I should say. And then it will add this information to your log as well. We also have the send notifications cron, which just sends notifications and it does pretty much what it says it will do. But here it says the script will send notifications to your mobile device when cases are created and when cases are routed to new tasks. So that's for mobile notifications for our Process Maker app. And so those are two examples of the cron files that we have. But the cron.php is the most important one. So the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to schedule cron jobs using cron tab. So let's go to this etc. folder we have. So here, cd, etc. So now that we're there, we can open this. And so it's going to give us a list of all of the files in that directory. And if we go all the way up to where C is, we'll be able to see cron tab here. And then this is what you use to schedule cron jobs in Linux environments. So if we want to schedule cron jobs, the next thing we need to do is edit this cron tab file. So if we want to edit it, we can enter the following command into our terminal here. So it's just going to be vi cron tab, like so. So here we're getting the content of the cron tab file. It's giving us a few instructions at the top, but what we really care about is down here. So here we can see that we can schedule a cron, and right now the cron is being scheduled for every 10 minutes, every hour, every day, and every month. And so if we wanted to go for every 2 hours, maybe we could change that there, but we would have to change maybe the minute as well. But anyway, we can change some of this information here. And as for the user, this should actually be run by the Apache user. So to get this cron to run executed by the Apache user, we can change that here by replacing root, like I just did, with data colon www to use the web user instead. So we can also use this cron tab to schedule the timer event cron and the send notifications cron in the same way. So if I want to escape out of editing this cron tab file, I'm going to press escape, then :WQ and press enter. So there I've just finished editing the cron tab. So if you remember the command line we used to back up our workspace, what we can also do is schedule that command line with cron tab in Linux. We can even add the date when the file is created using the Linux variable in the command line like this. And then we would just add the date, month, and year to the end of the file path like this. And then here I would put this for the day, then M for the month, and then Y for the year. And this should be capitalized. So here, that's how we would determine how to backspace to put the date when the workspace was backed up into the name of the tar file in the case that we have the workspace backup function being executed automatically in our cron tab. So the last part of this course will just be doing the same thing in your own virtual machine. So the next thing we can do is the last lab in the whole course. So here that's cron execution scheduling. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do that. And then after this, I'm going to show you how the new web entry works and how the new multiple file uploading works as well. And then if you don't have any more questions at the end, then maybe we'll be able to end this early. So I'll see you at about 1:55 to give you about 12 minutes to do this lab. Okay, hey, were you able to complete the lab? Okay, cool. So the last thing I'm going to show you today before we end this course is the Web Entry 2.0 and the multiple file versioning. And those are two new features added with Process 3.2.2. So in the Architect course, 3.2.2 wasn't out yet. So we were still using 3.2.1, and I didn't have the chance to go over what they do, the new functions that they have. So just to show you, I'm going to go back into my designer menu and quickly create a new process just to test these few features out. So I'll just name it web entry and multiple file versioning. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And then I'm just going to create a super simple process just to quickly show you what we're doing with these new features. Awesome, I got the line straight. That always bothers me. And again, it's really hard to do in the virtual machine. Okay, great. So I have these two tasks here. I'm just going to leave them as task 1 and task 2. And the first thing I'm going to show you is the web entry. So if you recall from the Architect course, all you do to configure a web entry is just right-click on a Start event and then choose Web Entry from the context menu. So if you remember the web entry from 3.2.1, you're going to notice that this looks pretty different. So here in this Forms option, we can choose a single Dynaform, and we don't have one yet. I actually might create one quickly. Yeah, let me do that. So first I'm going to just create a new test Dynaform. Here I'll just name it test and then quickly slap together a few web controls. Maybe here first I'll do a title. Test Dynaform. And then maybe just 2 text boxes. I don't know, let's just say name. And then another text box. What was the property? Oh, that must have been the variable. So I'll change this label to name and maybe this to email. It doesn't really matter. I'm not going to be filling in these fields, but I don't want to just leave them as text 1 and text 2. Okay, so I've got this test Dynaform. I'm just going to go ahead and save it and then close it. And let's just say, oh no, okay. There's one thing I forgot I wanted to do was add a field for the date. Now I'm not going to actually write a trigger here, but I just wanted to sort of give you an example of what we could do with the multiple steps in the web entry. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to date as well. Okay, and now I think I'm finally done for now, and I will be returning to this Dynaform to add the multiple file web control. But for now, I'm just going to stick with web entry. I'm just going to create an empty trigger just as an example. I actually didn't want to do that. Here, create get current time. And I'll just save that. So let's go back into our web entry configuration. I just right-clicked on the start event and chose web entry. So here, like before, you can also just choose a single Dynaform to have the user fill out web entry. But what's new is this multiple steps option here. So with the new version of web entry, we get this tiny interface here that allows us to add multiple steps to our web entry. So what we could do here, for example, is first of all, add our test Dynaform as the first step, but then we can actually add a trigger. So let's say I wanted to autofill that date text box with the using that trigger. I could actually do that here. And this is actually one of the more common requests that we get, is a way to autofill the date into a field on a Dynaform. So basically that's what we could do, because in the old web entry, you weren't able to add any triggers to go off before your Dynaform or even after it. It would just allow you to assign a Dynaform to the web entry and nothing else. And if you see here, we basically have everything available in our normal steps option for tasks in our web entry. So here we could add a trigger, multiple Dynaforms, multiple triggers, input documents, output documents, and external steps as well. So when I go into properties, we also have a few new properties here. So we could add a web entry title if we so choose, maybe enter your name. We could actually, so this authentication method here basically determines whether or not we can make this web entry public so anyone can use it, or we need to require user login, so someone has to use their process maker user credentials to log in to enter this web entry form. So I'll just leave it at anonymous. Then here we can select the callback action, so we can either redirect the user to the process maker response page after they've filled out the web entry. They can redirect it to a custom URL that we would enter here, or redirect and clear login info as well. So here we could show the task in the new case when they go back to their inbox as well. So here we can also determine how the link is generated. So if we wanted to generate the link using our workspace default values, we can do that here. And that means these options are disabled and we can't change them. Like I'm clicking around here and I can't change anything. But if we wanted to set the skin of our link, we could change that between classic and neoclassic, and other skins we might have on our workspace. We could also change the language in the case we have some translation files as well, and we could enter a custom host name. So I'm just going to leave it at this first option and then generate the link. And I need to change that too. Let me go back. Okay, well, I'll just redirect them to Process Maker. Well, it wouldn't let me save that. So let me just go here, generate link. Okay, and then I can just generate the link for my web entry. So that's basically how the new web entry feature works. It's not too difficult since you already know how to assign steps to tasks. you can do that the same thing with our new web entry here. So I can assign a Dynaform, assign the trigger, and all of that fun stuff. So I'm just going to cancel this. And then, of course, when the end user accesses that external link we just generated, they'll be able to complete all of the steps. So the triggers will go off. You'll have the Dynaform, maybe an input document or output document if you have one of those assigned. So that's basically what you can do with the new features of our web entry. So the last thing I want to show you today is multiple file versioning. So I'm going to go back into my Dynaform and I'm going to click edit, and I'm just going to add this file upload control here. And then so this file upload control allows us to upload multiple files into our processes. So I'm just going to hit save here. So here we have some properties, and since we need to link, we need to link this multiple file control to an input document and to be able to version all of the files that we upload using this control. So before I move on and look at this, test this in a case, I'm going to create a new input document. So if you want to enable versioning with your multiple file uploader control, you need to create an input document that also has versioning enabled. So I'm just going to name this test input document. And then down here, I'm going to make sure I have versioning enabled. I'm going to leave the rest of this blank, and then I'm going to hit save. So then when I go back into my Dynaform and I look at the properties of that multiple file control, I'll be able to select this input document here, and then the versioning is going to change to yes. So if you remember, the versioning is no without an input document. So to enable that, I'm going to link this to this test input document here. So that's all I really need to do to allow end users to use this multiple file control in their processes. So I'm going to go ahead and save this Dynaform here. And then I'm going to start adding, so this is already, no, this is not assigned. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this web entry because I want to start a case of this process, and it won't allow me to do that unless I go through the web entry, and I don't want to do that. So first I'm going to go to steps and assign my test Dynaform here. And then I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to assign myself to this task so I can start a new case. So here I'm assigning myself, and I'm going to save there. And then here I'm going to assign my input document so I can see all of the documents I uploaded with the multiple file uploader. So I'm going to go ahead and assign this test input document here. Okay, and so that's all I really need to do. Oh, and plus I need to assign myself to this one as well. But that's all I really need to do to see how the multiple file uploader versioning works. So here I've got that. I'll save my processes just in case. And then I'm going to start a new case of this process. So going to home, new case, then web entry in my multiple file versioning, task 1. So here I don't really care about filling in these fields, but I do want to take a look at this multiple file uploader. So I'm going to go ahead and choose files from my virtual machine to upload to this control. Let's see here, something that's not too big. This JPEG file. I'm going to open that. And it's going to take a little bit since I'm in the virtual machine and everything seems to go slower. Or I wonder if it would be easier, faster if I just were to upload a very small file. I think I have one of those here. So this is 0 bytes. Let's see if this will upload any faster. Oh, and I do need to add a submit button as well. So I'm going to go back into my designer and do that. And hopefully those will be uploaded. Although I wonder, since it's a virtual machine, but it should work. Okay. So I'm going to go back and add a submit button to that Dynaform and then reload it. So I'm going to go back here. Then I'm going to go back into my Dynaform. Make sure I add a submit button this time. Here, I'll save my Dynaform. Okay, so then I should be able to submit it. Although it seems like it's having problems uploading this file, these files. I wonder if I refresh the Dynaform. And let's try that again. And if not, I'm sorry about that. Then I'll have to just explain to you what this is going to look like. So yeah, it looks like it's just having problems uploading this file within the virtual machine. And so I apologize for that, but I'm just going to tell you what should happen is that when we go into our input document, we would be able to look at all of the files that we've uploaded to my Dynaform, and then we would be able to see the version here. So here I would see the title of the file, then the version number, and then here we would be able to upload a new version or delete the file as well. So here we would be able to add a new version of each document in our multiple file uploader, which is something we weren't able to do before. So let's see if we can attach one here. I doubt it though. Okay, so let's say if I were able to attach those files using the multiple file uploader, then I would be able to see them here from the previous step, and then I would be able to download them and add a new version as well. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the whole course. Do you have any other questions before I let you go? We still have a few more minutes, so I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. So since we started the trainings, so I think that was in December, or yeah, December. So you have a year from then to access Process Maker University. So yeah, you have like a lot more time, I think, pretty much to the end of this year, I assume. Maybe longer since well, just a year from the beginning. Okay, do you have anything else? and another tip I have for you is if you want to experiment using this virtual machine, something I do is kind of just create multiple copies of the same virtual machine, especially if you're working in the process maker source code. Like we were doing. Then if you screw up, you could just start back over with a fresh virtual machine. That's something I like to do. But you also have access to the training server as well for a pretty long time. I think also a year for that one. Maybe no, I think the license was 3 months, so maybe not. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, do you have any more questions? Okay, so I think we can stop here. Thank you so much for participating. I know you're the last man standing. If you could have Angel fill out that training survey, I would be really grateful to you. Otherwise, I'll just email to him as well. But anyway, thanks again. I hope you have a great afternoon. All right. All right, so this is goodbye. And oh yeah, I don't know if you guys are taking the developer certification test, but that will be available to next week. And we'll also send the recordings of the training sessions next week too. So maybe your colleagues can also watch those videos as well. So I'm really glad you thought it was a great training. I work really hard to prepare everything. So thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any more questions. You can also email me as well. I think you might have my email address, or Angel definitely does. Okay, so this is goodbye for real. Thank you so much.